like to begin by saying a brief hello to our ALD 606 students. Because it's an online course, I really don't have a chance to interact with you in person. I'm glad that you're watching this video and that we'll have a chance to learn more about the field of student affairs. I'm talking this morning with Dr. Boyd Yarbrough, who is the Vice President for Student Affairs at Cleveland State University. We are very pleased to have you joining us via this recording. So thank you for agreeing to talk with me about the field of student affairs, and particularly student affairs here at Cleveland State. And I'm going to begin by asking you a bit about your background.
Sure.
I know you came to Cleveland State in 2013 from Furman University.
Right.
Can you talk about the background and experiences that led you to this position?
Sure, absolutely. So we're going to back up and give kind of a chronological perspective of that. I went to Furman University as an undergraduate student, graduated as a psychology major in 1985. While I was there, involved in lots of things, but one of my supervisors, the director of housing at the time, asked me in my junior year, what is it I plan to do after I graduate? A perennial question. And I began talking about my ideas and plans, and he said, have you ever thought about student affairs? And I honestly had no idea what that was as a profession. So I asked him about that. He explained that and gave me more information, and a light bulb went off. It was like telling a 6-year-old boy or girl, you can play baseball for the rest of your life, and we'll pay you to do that. And of course, that's what I wanted to do, because that's what I loved as a student. So that really was what started me down this path in student affairs. I then went on to get my master's at Appalachian State in human development and counseling. Had my first professional experience at Frostburg State University in Maryland in housing again. Lived on campus both at Appalachian State and at Frostburg. Then went to Florida State for my doctorate. Lived on campus there while getting my EDD. And after I completed that, or actually before I finished my dissertation, accepted another job back at Frostburg State University. Was there as Associate Director of Housing for 3 years and then Assistant Vice President for 4 years before I had a chance to go back to Furman University, my undergraduate alma mater. While I was at Furman, I started as Director of Housing, did that for 9 years. Had an opportunity to learn more about the auxiliary side of the operations, and so accepted an Assistant Vice President position in charge of auxiliaries, and learned more about how the business side of things works. So I was in charge of parking and dining and bookstore and golf course and arena operations and things like that. And interestingly, that really paved the way for me coming here, because I came at Cleveland State, as you mentioned, in 2013 as interim dean of students, intended to come in for a short period of time, probably 8 or 10 months, fix a few things, and then move on. And part of what I proposed to President Berkman was merging student affairs with what had been called auxiliary affairs, which really fit perfectly within my experience, the bookstore, the dining, recreational services, residence halls, etc. He agreed to that proposal and also elevated it to a vice president's position. So that's the short version of my resume that got me here.
Great background, and that's helpful, I think, for students to hear that progression and also the proactive approach you took to helping get you to where you are today.
It's about opportunity.
It
Sometimes
is.
you can't anticipate that.
That's right. And sometimes you create them, sometimes you take advantage of them.
Sure.
Sometimes both.
Yeah.
So you've led in a way to my next question, which has to do with what areas are part of the student affairs here at Cleveland State, since I know it's a field that's organized differently at different institutions.
Sure.
So what units are you responsible for and report to you?
Yeah, great question. And I won't cover all of them, so I'll try to hit the highlights. We currently have 29 departments that make up the Division of Student Affairs. So I will hit them in kind of broad categories first, and then hopefully highlight a couple of others. So we are all about student success. So how we are organized and operationally structured is about student success. For me, that means things like taking care of students' well-being. So we have a health center and a counseling center, a disability center. That's all about the well-being of the students. Then we have student organizational type functions. So your traditional student activities, fraternity and sorority life, judicial affairs, dean of students type functions, those kinds of things are part of our operation. Then we have literally operations, and those are your traditional auxiliaries. So for us, they include dining, the bookstore, parking, Wolstein Arena, which is a little unusual. A lot of schools don't have an arena in their portfolio. For us, recreational services and residence life are also auxiliaries. We contract those out to a third-party company, but those are part of the portfolio as well, including things like the Viking card, which is the one ID card that students have. So that provides access to your residence hall. It provides access to events. It's a way you can use it for dining. You can put cash on it if you want, use it as a debit card, those types of things. And then we have some other areas that are kind of specialty focus areas, things like our Veteran Student Support Success Center. So it's focused specifically on current veterans or former veterans, former active military, who are here at CSU, and that has grown by leaps and bounds. We've also started a program called Lift Up Vikes, which is a resource center, a resource in the very hierarchical sense of taking care of students' hunger needs, their home needs, their health needs, those types of things. So that's been in existence for about a year and has met with resounding success. And then the most recent area of responsibility I have is for career services. So I've taken over that operation and in the process of rebuilding that right now.
Okay. That is a broad scope. Yeah.
Makes life fun.
It does make life fun. Thank you very much for sharing that. So given that broad scope and how much is part of student affairs, does your division of student affairs have a mission or a mission statement?
Sure, absolutely. So the answer is yes, and the more expanded answer is we are looking to revisit all of that. So we'll be working through a new strategic plan probably in the next 18 months or so. I expect that from that will emerge a new vision and mission statement, but our current mission statement focuses on student success. So we're supporting students in and around the classroom. So in the classroom in the sense that if they need study skills and help, if they need accommodations from a disabilities perspective, we help them in that regard. And then we're here to support them for the other 20 hours of the day that they're not in a class, whether that's their recreational needs, their food needs, their parking needs, counseling needs, all of those other things, and quite frankly, just to have fun. So a lot of the student activities portion of that is about introducing students to this lovely city that we have and using the city as kind of an extended campus for us, so taking advantage of that. When the weather is like it is today in the winter time, we'll do a lot of programming inside and bring in speakers and concerts and just fun activities for the students.
That is great. That's great. I forgot when we were talking about structures. I'll back up just for a minute.
Sure.
I forgot to clarify. You do report to the president
Correct.
as vice president.
Right. And that's a good question as well. When I first came in as interim dean, I reported to the provost.
Okay.
So my official title was interim dean of students and associate provost. When the president approved the organizational restructure, that's when I became vice president, and the reporting line shifted to reporting to the president.
Okay, great, thank you. I'm glad
Sure.
I asked that question. How would you, as you think about success, how do you measure success and effectiveness within student affairs?
Sure. Yeah, it's an excellent question because the state is very focused and fixated on student success. And by and large, what they mean by that is graduation rates and retention rates. So those are important metrics, obviously, but there, as you know, are a whole array of other metrics, and some of them are difficult to measure,
Right.
that account for the totality of the student success in a student development perspective. So for us, success might look like working with a student with disabilities, helping that student understand the nature of their disabilities and the tools and opportunities we can provide to help meet those challenges, and empowering them to be their own best advocate. And then when we see a student succeed in a class or succeed by retention or succeed in graduation, there are these little successes that allowed the big measurable successes to occur.
Sure.
Right, so that's one example. Another example might be a student who's dealing with a health issue or a counseling issue. Perhaps a family member has passed away or is struggling with life, and the student may drop out of school or consider dropping out of school. And oftentimes we can help those students through these difficult times, get them to the point where either they can navigate that and stay engaged in school, or in some cases stop out and re-engage in school, but not have the stop out be the end of the story. It might just be the end of a chapter.
Right.
So there are lots of examples like that. And then I'll go back to Lift Up Vikes, the Student Resource Center is another example. We have a substantial portion of our students here at Cleveland State are first generation college students. When you look at their expected family contributions from the FAFSA, the Financial Aid Report form, about 55 to 60% of them are expected to have zero family contribution,
Wow.
which means there is a high need group.
Yeah.
What that gets translated into in a day-to-day world is we have students who either cannot afford to buy textbooks or choose not to buy textbooks so that they can do something else. They can pay a utility bill, they can put food on the table, something like that. So the very first thing we started with Lift Up Vikes was a food pantry and partnering with the Greater Cleveland Food Bank to provide that. And it has been humbling to see the number of students that we've been able to serve just through opening our food bank. And then that's opened up a whole plethora of additional needs that I didn't have full awareness of. Number of students we have who are homeless. Number of students we have who have, despite the Affordable Care Act, do not have health care access. So lots of things like that. So the fact that we have a health service here on campus that is free to our students is a remarkable resource. The fact that students here have access to RTA through their student fee is a wonderful resource. So all of those come together to support the ultimate student success.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, Lift Up Bike is not something I was aware of, so
Right.
I really appreciate
It is
you
very new.
talking about that. I
Good,
knew
good.
a few years ago the Women's Center was doing a food
Right.
pantry kind
And
of
this was
thing.
actually born out of the
Yeah,
Women's
that's what
Center.
I
Jillian
wondered.
Keller is in charge of both of those, and she
Okay.
came to me shortly after I came to CSU and said, you know, I have this idea, I haven't really gotten much traction with it. What do you think? And I said, absolutely, let's figure out how to make it work. And
That's
about
great.
9 months later, we opened our doors.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
Good to hear that.
Thank you.
Yeah, not necessarily something that I think most of us would really think about in terms of the needs on a campus. But
Absolutely.
You've
Well,
highlighted them well.
Thank you. It also is indicative of the types of needs that college students often have. It may not be obvious on their face or on their sleeve that they have a need for X. So whether it's a disability, you know, if it's a physical disability, maybe that's more obvious. If it's a learning disability, that may not be obvious at all.
Yeah.
The homelessness, for the most part, they are in and amongst our student body, and most people have no
There we
idea.
go. Yeah.
The food insecurities, the same types of things. You know, our students are remarkably able to navigate systems in ways that don't draw attention to themselves.
Yeah.
But once they are aware that we have resources available to help them out, they're happy to take advantage of those
Yeah.
resources.
Sometimes it's amazing to realize that students actually do navigate and succeed
Remarkably well.
through those obstacles
Yeah,
and those
remarkably well.
circumstances.
And
That's
what
great.
we want to do is make that process easier for them.
That's fantastic. With staying on student success for just a minute, with the campus, the university as a whole focused on student success, I'm not sure if there are task forces at this point, but does your office then have representatives in some of these initiatives?
Absolutely. So just about any cross-functional initiative or task force you can think of, Student Affairs is a contributor or a leader in those areas. So whether it's the Student Success Group or the newly formed Retention Task Force, we have an Enrollment Task Force, all of those issues, Student Affairs is at the table. One of our main initiatives right now is working with Career Services and Academic Advising and tightening the partnerships and relationships between those two. So as you heard, Career Services is a part of the Division of Student Affairs. Academic Advising is part of Academic Affairs. And it's easy for people to stay in their lanes and their silos and not work collaboratively, but this is a perfect example of when we can come together it only benefits students.
That's fantastic. Thank you very much.
Sure.
So let's talk a little bit, if we can, about challenges and issues in student affairs. I know there are some.
Right.
And that's something in the course that we're talking about generally, just challenges and issues facing universities.
Sure.
So can you talk about some of those challenges and
Right.
issues here
Right.
at Cleveland State?
Sure, we only have 7 hours, right? So
It'll be brief.
We'll condense down to a few.
Hit the
I'll pick a
highlights.
few, sure. So let me start with judicial, because that's something that may not come first to mind to people when you think about challenges within student affairs. The reason I pick that as an example is I think it's a perfect scenario for student affairs professionals, or those aspiring to become those, to begin to understand the tension between what's best for an individual versus what's best for the whole, right? So in a classic judicial situation, I'm going to use sexual assault as an example. In many of those instances, we have a male who has perpetrated a crime or violation of university policy against a female. In almost all cases, one or both of those parties have been drinking or consuming drugs. And usually there are no other witnesses. So we have a judicial hearing that gathers as much information as we can and makes a determination about the outcome of that. Remember, we use preponderance of evidence as our standard for making those determinations, not a legal definition of determination. But in those instances, if indeed a university policy has been violated, it is quite likely that that student found responsible would be suspended or expelled from the university. So that is very traumatic for the individual. And yet, I would argue that not having that student in our community is better for the total. So in this case, one student pays a substantial price, but it's for the benefit, I believe, of the greater community, benefit and safety of the greater community. That's one example.
That's a good example, and that's a tough issue that's certainly receiving a lot of attention.
Absolutely. And quite frankly, a lot of colleges have not handled this well over the years, which is why we have so much more focus on Title IX. It's why we have so much more focus on sexual assaults. It's why the media is very interested in shining a bright light on colleges and universities to make sure we're not covering up things. And interestingly, another dynamic within the higher education world right now is there's beginning to be pushback for advocates for those who are accused, and sometimes feeling like the college has rushed to judgment or branded them in a way that was unfair or unjust. So it's a balancing act,
It
right?
is.
And
It is.
and all students have rights and responsibilities, both those that are accused and those that become victims.
And sometimes in those cases, often maybe the legal system or the police system is involved, but
Right.
that's a separate process. Is that
Correct.
right?
So at Cleveland State, we use our police as partners in that
Okay.
process, and they certainly have legal responsibilities and parameters that they work under. And it's not my role to tell them what those are or to remind them to stay in their lane. They're quite proficient at that. But we have different roles and responsibilities within the Division of Student
Right.
Affairs. And we have partnered recently with the Cleveland Rape Crisis Center,
Okay,
which
great.
provides a wonderful additional resource for students to understand the process in a less threatening manner. So we can partner with a counselor for them before they talk to the police, before they even talk to us through a judicial process. And the intent there is to do two things. One, to be as supportive as possible of the victim, and to communicate as well as possible all the things that usually she can expect through the process, and then empower her to make decisions about how she wants this to be handled.
Thank you.
So that's another example.
Yeah, that's a good example. Judicial affairs also would deal with things like academic misconduct issue.
We sometimes do.
Accusations, is that
So
correct?
that's an interesting situation where it's really bifurcated. So the first responsibility for dealing with academic misconduct is with the professor in the classroom
Right,
itself.
right.
So if you are my teacher and I cheat on a test, you have every right to hold me accountable. You can give me a failing grade for that test, you can give me a failing grade for the whole course, you can require an additional assignment, that's your prerogative as the instructor. Where we get involved is if the student challenges that or pushes back or feels that they've been unfairly treated.
Okay.
And then we can get involved in a judicial process. Or another time that we have gotten involved in the past is if it's a more widespread issue. So let's use your class for example. If there were allegations that multiple members of the class were cheating in your class,
okay.
then we could step in and be involved, because that's not really no one would expect you to be an expert to be able to investigate that and figure that out, and we would provide assistance
Okay.
and
Good.
support in that kind of scenario.
Good, thanks.
Some other challenges, I'll mention one other, and then we can move on to other topics that you have, is at Cleveland State right now, we're in 2017. We, like many institutions, are being faced with financial challenges.
Right.
And so we are literally going through exercises as a university now to determine areas that we can cut back, areas that we can be more efficient and effective with our resources. And in some cases, areas that might need additional resources, like ADA compliance and disability services. We have a legal responsibility to meet those expectations. So part of the challenge for me is looking at our entire operation, which is about $37 million, and determining how we can make cuts within our units and what impact those cuts will bring about. So the easy decisions are, could you cut $500 out of a $5,000 program? Could you, instead of having 10 social events, could you have 8? Those are easy decisions to make because there's relatively impact on the quality of someone's life. The harder decisions are if you have a bigger financial challenge, do you have to make decisions about staffing? Do you have to close an office? And we're not at the point that we're making those drastic decisions yet, but we're preparing for that because I would rather be prepared than be caught by surprise and then have to scramble to figure those things out.
Yeah. Another issue, I imagine, based on what I know about higher education, that is affecting student affairs would be mental health issues.
Absolutely, sure.
Could you talk about that a bit?
Sure. As you already know, mental health is a growing demand, exponentially growing demand for college-age students. It's happening all across the country. We're seeing several things that contribute to that. One is many students are coming at a much earlier age to be diagnosed and be treated for something, whatever that is. Could be as simple as depression, schizophrenia, bipolar, learning disabilities, a huge gamut of things that they might have been diagnosed with and begun treatment with, sometimes as early as grade school. So the percentage of students that are coming to any campus that fall in that category has increased probably 90 to 120% across the United States in the last 2 years, really dramatically increased. At the same time, most campuses have had very few additional resources provided for counseling services, right? So the old counseling model that I am familiar with is if you have a need and you have the courage to go see someone in the counseling center, you can make an appointment, get somebody and have exceptional care and treatment. You see somebody probably for 50 minutes. You may come back and see them for multiple sessions, and that's how we worked with students. What has happened, because the demand has increased so dramatically and our staffing has not increased at all, is it forces colleges to explore different models. Much like the healthcare industry went through radical transformation over the past few years. So one of the things we've changed here at CSU is we still have 50-minute slots for the highest need student, but we're also opening up 15-minute slots and 30-minute slots.
Interesting.
And what that does is allow a single counselor, instead of just seeing 6 to 8 clients in a day, maybe they see 20 clients in a day.
Wow.
Not for a full 50 minutes, clearly, but they're able to make touches. That also seems to work very nicely for where our students are now, because they're not necessarily looking to sit down for 50 minutes and explore something really deeply. They just might want to come in and talk about an update on an issue they're dealing with, kind of fine tune or check in on something and leave, and then come back at another time for a quick check-in. Another thing that we've implemented just in the past year is 24-hour access to our counseling support staff. Clearly, what we're not doing is having a counselor stay awake all night in case someone needs something, but what we've done is contracted out with a national counseling provider that has fully licensed counselors available around the clock. We use them after hours for our counseling center. And what happens at CSU is a student will literally call the same counseling number, so they don't have to remember a different number. If it is indeed after hours, it rolls over to this service. It is answered by a professional somewhere in the United States who says, Cleveland State Counseling after hours, how may I help you? And then the student or staff member says what they want to say. They will do one of two things. They will either work with the issue, assuming they'll do one of three things. Either work with the issue and help the student get to a better place if it's something that they can do by telephone, or they will, if it's an urgent matter, they will call 911 and get immediate medical assistance for the student. Or the third option is in between, and that is that they will gather information, share that with our counseling center staff the next morning, and provide follow-up contact. So it's just like having after-hours care for a physician.
Right.
You call a number, somebody calls you back in that case, gather some basic information. If it can help you, that's fantastic. If they know you need to go to the hospital, they'll help you get there. Or in some cases, they'll make an appointment or help with the transition to come in the next day or at a later time for follow-up.
Yeah.
So we've just
That's
implemented that for
interesting.
the last year as
Oh,
well.
good. Yeah, that's great. In a way, this may lead into a next question, which deals with trends.
Sure.
And that is maybe a trend in
Right.
terms of how to respond to a growing need within the resources that you have.
Yeah.
But could you talk about trends within the area of student affairs?
Sure. So a number of things come to mind. One is I grew up in the email generation, so for me, I was very accustomed to members of the college sending me an email saying, Boyd, I need you to do this, or why didn't you do that? I would check the email, I would respond to that, or I would ignore the email and pay the consequences for ignoring the email. Our generation of students now are vastly different than that. They're much more plugged in, they're much more likely to, they'll have a phone, but they might not even respond to a phone call. But if you text them, they're very likely to respond to a text. So when I was growing up, that felt very private and intrusive, and that's kind of what college students expect these days.
Mm-hmm.
So for our counseling center, to use that as an example, one of the options we provide when a student first makes contact with us is, would you like for us to follow up with you by text, email, phone call, etc. Let the student be in charge of the method of contact and then provide us the information, whether it's an email, a cell phone number, or text connection that they prefer.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So that's one of the trends that we're responding to. Another trend that I am seeing here at CSU is really predicated on what's happening with the country nationally. So as a new presidential administration comes in, there has been lots of angst about what this means, and I see a lot of divisiveness on college campuses. In some cases, I see a great amount of fear and concern. What will that mean? What will this mean to me as a student? So whether it's the executive order that impacts international students, or whether it's gay, lesbian, bisexual students concerned about their rights, or whether it's Muslim students wondering whether they will be welcome and allowed to stay in our country, those are the types of impacts that I'm seeing on our college students. Mm-hmm. And we're trying to do two things related to that. We're trying to be as supportive as we can through counseling and other offices reaching out to our students. We work very closely with our International Student Office, for instance. But we're also trying to be proactive and provide opportunities to express themselves appropriately. So Tuesday of next week, for instance, we're partnering with the Student Government Association, our campus police, to talk about the the travel ban that has been
Right.
put in place and now retracted and seems to be in kind of no man's land right now. What impact this has on our students and how they're feeling about that. So proactively, before it was retracted by the court system, we were telling our international students, we advise you not to leave the country because we don't know
Right.
if you can get back, or if you can, how easy or difficult it will be for you to get back. So just staying in touch and staying in front of that with students and giving them a forum to express their fears, their frustrations, their concerns in a safe place.
That's great. That's a good example. I mean, we're recording this in early 2017, as you said, in the early days of new administration.
Right.
And so that has raised issues on college campuses. We don't know in a year what issues will present themselves.
Sure.
Will this still be an issue? Will something new be an issue? But I think it demonstrates that interplay between a university and the political system and greater society. There will be impacts. We just can't always predict what they are.
Absolutely, yeah.
And you're right, trying to stay ahead of them is a huge challenge.
And sometimes we do okay of that, and sometimes we find ourselves reacting.
Yeah, you play catch up.
Sure, sure.
I was interested when you talked about communication trends, because I, as an instructor, have found that I never would have used text messaging a few years ago, but I do now.
Okay.
And I found that very effective.
Sure, sure.
So on occasion, I will send a text message.
Right. Well, and this medium is another great example, to be able to record information and have educational opportunities for students online.
Right.
Was not an easy thing to do a number of years ago. And the technology and the more effective use of that technology makes the learning much more realistic, I think.
Yeah. Well, I know the ALD students, for one group, are certainly happy to have online courses available.
Good.
Even though they miss the high touch of in-person classes,
Sure.
the convenience and flexibility are really terrific. So thinking about our students, actually, that I'll transition to thinking about graduate students.
Sure.
I know most of the programming probably that your office does and the student life area does would really be aimed at undergraduate students, but our students are interested also in what kinds of activities or outreach might occur for graduate students. So
Sure.
maybe you can talk about that.
Yeah, I think it's a fantastic question. One of the things that I found interesting here at Cleveland State is less of a bifurcation between undergrads and graduate students. And by that I mean the average age of our undergraduate students is about 27 years old.
Yeah, that's a
So
good
if you
point.
think about a traditional graduate student at most campuses, that's about the sweet spot of many of graduate students as well. I recognize in AALD and other programs, in my program at Florida State, I had a nun who was 80 years old taking her dissertation courses. So it runs the gamut, I recognize that. What that also means at Cleveland State is we do programming for students, period. So we're not saying this program is only for undergraduate students and grad students are not welcome. Though sometimes we target populations that clearly would be more appealing to undergraduate students or graduate students. So a lot of the fun activities that we do, I call them kind of the circus or the fair types activities. We'll have them several times a year in the student center where we have pommel horses, and you can box with each other with kinds of things. We'll have climbing walls and stuff like that. That generally is appealing to a younger population, which generally might be our undergraduate students. Every grad student is welcome to come and play and participate as much as they want. I think the real interesting question for me is, what is it that graduate students want that is not currently being provided for? So some of the things that come to my mind are evening and weekend opportunities. So is that when you come to campus for your classes, if you come, do you find that the bookstore is open if you need something from the bookstore? Or did it close at 5 o'clock and now you have no way to access something you need? Or do you have access to financial aid and other administrative offices in a timely manner that is helpful with your schedule? and quite frankly, what programs and activities would be helpful and of interest to you. So we're currently working with, I don't remember the student's name, but it's a graduate student who's trying to resurrect the Graduate Student Government Association. I'm not sure that will be the actual name of the group, but it's that concept.
Right.
So we've been talking with a student for the past couple of weeks and helping her kind of get her hands around what that would look and feel like. Interestingly, on all the campuses I've worked with, there has always been a tension between undergraduate student government and the desire to have a graduate student government. And the grad students usually feel like it should be a separate entity, and the undergraduates often don't understand that.
Yeah, interesting.
And I've seen, at Florida State, I think there was a very robust graduate student association and undergraduate student association. Every other campus I've been on, it's kind of ebbed and flowed depending on who was in the leadership role at the time.
Yeah. Well, perhaps this will be a question that I will pose to the class in
Please do.
discussion forum.
And anything I can do to help,
Yeah.
would be happy to engage in conversation.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. So if there are students in this class who might be interested in moving into the student affairs arena, what kind of advice would you give them?
Sure. I love questions like that because, I started by telling my story of how I got into student affairs, and we all have our own story. It's usually revolved around an activity that we did, a faculty or a staff member who we made a connection with, and we enjoyed the impact that person had on us, and we would like to have a similar impact on other students. But there's so many different accesses and points of entry into student affairs. So whether you're a traditional housing person like I am, you enjoy student activities, some people are cut out for the judicial world, some people love fraternity and sorority life. I was just talking to one of our students before coming here this morning who is interested in running a counseling center on a college. And so my question was, so I assume you've been to our counseling center? And she said, no. I'm like, well, let me take you there and introduce you to our staff so you can get to know them, and then you can see if that is indeed what you're interested in, or you realize it's not really what I thought, maybe I want to explore other areas. There's such a wide array of possibilities within the Division of Student Affairs, so you can get into healthcare or recreational services. It's 29 different departments here at CSU.
Right.
Most campuses have some variation of all of those. And what I would really encourage your students to do is talk to people who work in the areas they're interested in. Whether you're interested in being a vice president, sometimes people will have that as an aspirational goal. Virtually no one starts there. So you start in typically a functional area like housing or recreational services or counseling, and then you work your way up through the hierarchy, if you will.
Yeah. And students do have an opportunity or a requirement to do an internship or practicum experience.
Yeah.
That might be another way that they can
Test the waters.
Right,
Absolutely.
if they're able to work that out.
That opened up so many doors for me, both in my master's and my doctorate program, and really affirmed the things that I love about student affairs. And it's a great way to make connections as well.
Right.
So one of the first mentors I had was a vice president of student affairs at another institution many years ago, and we still stay in touch to this day.
Isn't that great?
It's fabulous. So he's retired and he's loving the retired life, and he periodically checks in to see how I'm doing.
Yeah, that's really nice. That networking is
So
so helpful.
The network is critical, and don't be bashful about reaching out to folks. I have people ask me all the time or send me an email, hey, would love to learn more about student affairs or hear your story or just have coffee together. And as much as time allows, I welcome those opportunities.
That's great.
Yeah.
That's great. So perhaps you'll be contacted by one of the
I
students
welcome
who,
that.
who watches the interview.
And I love coffee, so we can always sit down for 15 minutes and
That's
talk
great.
over coffee.
That's great.
Sure.
That really concludes the questions that I had, but I
Great.
wanted to, before we're done, see if there are other things that you wanted to mention.
Sure, I appreciate it. I think we've covered all the topics that I originally had in mind. The one thing that I would like to say and maybe wrap up in conclusion is I love teaching, and so I wish I could be before you today in the classroom, engaging with you and interacting with you. This is the next best thing, and so I appreciate the opportunity. And I do extend the invitation for you to reach out to me. My name again is Boyd Yarbrough. My email at CSU is e.b.yarbrough. Feel free to write me at any point, and happy to make a personal connection. Thank you for the opportunity.
Oh, well, thank you very much.
Sure.
Appreciate it. And thank you to the class for watching this interview.
Thanks.